Dear friends, it gives me a tremendous pleasure, and it is a true privilege to welcome you all here tonight to what promises to be a very uplifting and fascinating discussion with one of the people I regard as one of the greatest thinkers into human well-being and happiness of our time. Professor Tal Ben Shachar studied and lectured at University. He created and is credited for giving the most popular course in Harvard's history on the topic of, well, happiness, of course. He's the author of numerous international bestsellers, among them Happier and Being Happy, which have been translated into 25 languages. In 2011, Tal co-founded Potential Life, which provides leadership programs based on the science of behavioral change to organizations, to schools, to sports teams, and organizations globally. There is so much more that I can say about Tal, but I do want to conclude, because time is short, with what I view as one of the great compliments I can give Tal, and that is that I have had the privilege of meeting Tal on a number of occasions, and your profound humility and humanity comes through in each of those interactions. And as I wrote in the Facebook introduction to this evening, you're one of that rare breed who literally embodies his teachings and philosophy. And I think that is quite unique and refreshing. And so it gives me once again great pleasure to introduce you to our wonderful, growing online virtual congregation. Without further ado, Professor Tal Ben Shachar.
Okay, hi. Thank you very much, Rabbi, for these very warm words. It's wonderful to see you all here virtually, and I'd like to just begin, maybe, Rabbi, before we turn to questions, with a few words, just some musings that I've had over the past couple of months, which seem like a couple of years, if not a lifetime. You know, these are complicated times. These are, for many people, difficult times. And the question that I've been asked often over the past couple of months is, what's the relevance of happiness studies now? What is the relevance of the science of well-being? One of my Israeli friends said to me, don't you want to just maybe quarantine your field for a while until we emerge out of this situation? Well, my answer to this question, which was said in just half in jest, is no. I actually think the science of happiness is extremely important now, even more so than usual. And here is why. You see, the science of happiness contributes to our well-being when things are going well. So let's say if I'm at a 3 and I want to get to a 5, then there's a lot that we can learn from positive psychology, the science in general. At the same time, also when we're not doing well, when I'm, let's say, a -5, then the science of happiness can help a great deal. How can it help? By helping us become more resilient, by strengthening our psychological immune system. Now, I would even take it a step further. It's not just resilience that the science of happiness can cultivate. Rather, it's what Nassim Taleb, who is a professor at NYU, called anti-fragility. What is anti-fragility? Anti-fragility in many ways is resilience 2.0. So what is resilience 1.0? Resilience is about bouncing back. So it's actually a term that comes from engineering. You have, let's say, a ball, you squish it, you exert pressure and stress on it, it recovers. It goes back to what it was before. Or you drop the ball and it bounces back up. Hence, when we talk about resilience, we talk about bouncing back. So that's resilience 1.0. That's what we traditionally think about when we think about resilience, which is, of course, very important. Anti-fragility takes it a step further. So let's say you have the same material that you squish, that you exert stress on. Not only does it revert back to its original state, it actually becomes stronger as a result of the pressure that was exerted on it. So to use the analogy of a ball, you drop it, it doesn't just bounce back to where it was before, it bounces actually higher than its previous point. That is anti-fragility. You see anti-fragility throughout nature. Let me give you a very simple example of an anti-fragile process. You go to the gym, you lift weights. What happens to your muscles? You're stressing them, you're putting pressure on them. They actually break, but only in the short term. In the long term, you go, once, twice, 20 times, 100 times, you actually become stronger as a result. In other words, you grow stronger, better, healthier as a result of the pressure that was exerted on it. That's an anti-fragile process. You grow stronger as a result of pressure and stress. This is precisely what the science of happiness can help us do. It can help us understand the conditions that we need to put in place in order for us to be ready for growth, for development, as we emerge from this difficult situation, uncertain times, complex times. In my classes and when I teach at university, I often ask my students the following two questions. I ask them first, so have you heard of PTSD? Please put your hand up if you did. PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. The overwhelming majority of students put their hands up, whether they're psych majors or studying another topic. Why? Because they've read about it in the newspapers, people talk about it. We all, or most of us, know what PTSD is. And then I asked them a second question. And remember, there are also psychology students in my class. I asked them the following: have you heard of PTG? And if you have, put your hand up. Very few people know what PTG is. PTG stands for post-traumatic growth. Do you know that you're as likely, or actually more likely, to experience growth after a trauma than to experience a breakdown, a permanent breakdown? In other words, PTG is more likely than PTSD if, and this is a very big if, certain conditions are in place. One of the conditions is you need to know of its existence. You need to understand that PTG is an option. Because if you don't know that it's an option, very often it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. It just doesn't happen. Second, there are other conditions that we can put in place. And if we know about them, we can significantly increase, not ensure, but significantly increase the likelihood that we will grow after a difficult experience. We are, as a society, going through a difficult experience. We need to know about PTG. We need to know about the conditions that we can put in place so that this can become an anti-fragile process where we grow stronger than we were before, as opposed to a fragile process, which means breaking down. Here lies the importance, the value of the science of happiness for this period. A, understanding that PTG or anti-fragility is possible, and B, letting us know what these conditions are, what the science says about what we can do in order to increase the likelihood of PTG, of anti-fragility.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. That's fascinating. I think it's something that definitely I can say and speak for myself, I wasn't aware of, was the potential PTG that you just described. It's actually quite fascinating that in the Bible, there's only one individual who is called a man of success, Ish Matzliach. And that individual is Joseph, who, of course, we all know the end of his story becomes incredibly powerful, the viceroy of Egypt. But his biography reads like one long list of reasons to go to therapy. He has dealt with literally every aspect of the underbelly of the human condition, from betrayal to potential fratricide to kidnapping to being favored to envy, all of those emotions. And ultimately, he ends up in a foreign land at 17 years old, weak, vulnerable, insecure. In his mind, as he heads down to Egypt, thinking, I will never see my family again. And yet he is the one who is called a man of success. And amazingly, he is called a man of success on two occasions. Number one, when he is a slave, and number two, when he becomes a prisoner. Not when he reaches the top, but actually when he falls to the bottom and gets up again. Because I would argue that is an example of PTG, his ability to be resilient and deal and adapt and adopt to his circumstance to bring out his greater strengths is what defines success in the biblical Jewish tradition. So,
yeah, Rabbi, I'd love to build on what you said with your permission. So you look at the word matzliach. In Hebrew, the word comes from the same root as tzalach, tzadik lamet chet. That word also is the word for getting across. So litzloach is to get across. So I get across a barrier. I get across a river. I cross a river. Tzalachti, which means that hatzlacha, success, is associated with the ability to get across barriers, to get across hardships and difficulties. So the word hatzlacha has a great deal of meaning in it. The second word that is meaningful in this context is the word for crisis, mashber, which is also a biblical word. And the word mashber in Hebrew, which means crisis, it also is the seat upon which the woman who's giving birth sits. In other words, it's a place that is a crisis and also a place from which birth emerges, a new life emerges. And that is also very meaningful because a mashber, a crisis, a barrier, a place we need to lehatzliach, is a potential place of growth, of new emergence. So that is embedded in the very language that we speak.
You know, Tal, you touched on a topic that's very close to my heart. In fact, it's the subject matter of my next book, which is how the 50 words that shape Jewish thought. And it basically takes 50 Hebrew words and demonstrates how etymologically those words describe the very essence of an idea that's uniquely Jewish and very often counterintuitive. So for example, in the category you just shared, we have the word tzara, which means constriction, that when its letters are rearranged, spelled tzohar, which means a window, or ratzah, which means one's inner willpower. The word for, we have the word, for example, nega, which means affliction. Its letters, when rearranged, spell oneg, which means a deeper level of pleasure. You have the word, for example, vaya'avek ish imo, when Jacob wrestles with the angel, as it were. So the word avuka means actually a light. It means a fire that's multiple wicks. And so we activate deeper levels and, as it were, spiritual wicks within our soul through wrestling and through struggling. Interestingly, petil means the same, like naftule, which means wrestle, also means a wick. And we could go on this beautiful theme, which is interestingly highlighted in the Hasidic teachings of no one less than the Baal Shem Tov, who actually, here's an amazing thing people don't appreciate. He used to sign his name as Israel from a cup. In fact, which is a Russian word from the trenches, when in fact he was from a place called Plust. And the history of the Baal Shem Tov is such that he was born into poverty. In his region, the homes were destroyed, and so he was literally raised in a trench, carved out in the ground. And he would sign his name forever as Israel from the trenches, never to forget that origin. And of course, that empowering teaching that trenches don't mean a culmination or a limitation, but rather perhaps a birthing stool, as you put it so eloquently, for greater growth. So let's jump into the next question, a little bit more personal. Tal, what brought you to the topic of happiness? How do you choose the topics you write about? And are your books written from the inside out? What I mean by that is from personal struggle and experience with the subjects you write about, or from a more intellectual place of fascination?
Yeah, so the answer here is an easy answer for me. It's from a personal crisis, from mashber.
Mm.
Um, Specifically, I became interested in happiness because of my own unhappiness. Now, I found myself in my second year at Harvard studying computer science, doing very well academically. I did very well in athletics. I played squash, did quite well socially, and yet I was very unhappy, and it didn't make sense to me. Before, when if I had to rewind, 2 years before being a college student, I was unhappy, but I was serving in the army, so I had a good excuse for being unhappy. But fast forward to that time, as a student, and having checked many of the boxes that I'd set for myself, and I wasn't happy, I realized that I was looking in the wrong place. Meaning, I realized that I was looking for happiness in success, and it clearly didn't bring that. So that's when I started to study, and that's when I turned to the academic study of well-being. Because initially, where I looked at was the new age self-help movement, and I read many of those books, and I attended many seminars, and I must say they didn't provide me what I was looking for. Whereas delving deeper into academic psychology, into philosophy, that actually did provide me more. So it started very much as a personal quest and a personal crisis, and then moved outwards to to the world of academia, scholarship, and thought.
Can I ask you in one word what you found is the difference between the self-help literature and the more academic approach? I'm fascinated to know, in a few words, how you would basically communicate the difference between the two.
Yeah, the self-help movement has a great deal of reach. Millions, if not billions, of people read those books. It's accessible. There's a great deal of charisma associated with that movement in the workshops, even through the writing. It oozes out. However, it's not based on research. It's very often over-promising and under-delivering. So promising you, these are the 5 steps to happiness, the one secret of the good life. And unfortunately, that's not realistic, and very often misinforms the reader or the participant. So that's the self-help New Age. On the other hand, you have academia. There's a great deal of rigor there. There's a great deal of substance. However, it's not accessible. Mm-hmm. This is informal research, but the average academic journal article is read by 7 people. Mm-hmm. And it's unfortunate. And where I see the science of happiness coming in is it's merging the two. Yes, it's rigorous, it's academic, and at the same time, it's accessible to people.
That's actually fascinating. By the way, one of the ways I would describe you is an accessible academic. And I think that's one of the highest accolades I can give you, because people sort of fall to either extreme. If they're too accessible, very often they're pandering. And they're basically going out, they're feeling the pulse of society, and they're saying, okay, this is what you want to hear, I'll share it with you in a way that sounds slightly above or more sophisticated than you would naturally hear these ideas. Or people that are, like I said, really some highbrow and oftentimes convoluted. So thank you for taking the time and energy to take deep ideas and use simple language to express them, because I know from personal, my own limited personal experience with these matters, very often the ideas are powerful, but it's about the vessel, it's about the packaging, it's about the wording, it's about drawing these ideas down that makes them so compelling and therefore accessible. I would actually argue, interestingly, that throughout history, it's not necessarily the most creative people, but often the people who made things accessible that become household names and are the ones who we talk about. Just think about, Bezos from Amazon, or Brin from Google, or WhatsApp, or Zuckerberg from Facebook. and so forth. These are individuals whose main, I guess, genius was creating access in whatever field it may be it social interactivity, shopping, etc. And by the way, in the Jewish history, we find the same. The most popular individuals were the ones who were not necessarily the most creative, but the ones who gave access. For example, Moses is called Rabbeinu, our teacher, until this day. I don't think there's anyone on this planet or who ever lived who has such a devoted following of thousands of years across history. Rashi, famously, is really popular. He's the only commentary in every Bible. And he says in his mission statement, my agenda is to make available the plain text even to the 5-year-old. Etc. By the way, the Baal Shem Tov created access from spiritual experience. The Lubavitcher Rebbe and Chabad creates access of Jewish engagement and involvement. And I believe there's something true there. And that's what makes your writing so refreshing in its access. But that brings me to the second question I wanted to ask you. Some months back, half a year or so back, I published a book called Positivity Bias. And I have to say, I was so touched, honored, and humbled that you wrote a beautiful book that I used in the promotion of the book. And in it, you wrote something. If you have a moment to dwell on this, I'd love to hear perhaps some of your thoughts. You wrote there that growing up, my parents and teachers would tell me stories about the Lubavitcher Rebbe and other Chabad rabbis. These stories impacted me in a profound way and still affect the way I see and experience life. So I'm actually super curious to learn more about your connection to Chabad and the Rebbes in particular, and maybe share a story or two that deeply impacted the way you interact with life, both in from your childhood, but also maybe even until today.
Yeah, so, Rabbi, one of the first things that I remember my grandmother telling me growing up was that we are direct descendants of the Baal Shem Tov.
Wow.
And
oh, we are related. That means because I'm not joking. My grandmother's a direct descendant of the Baal Shem Tov. In fact, my father is the 10th generation. And the Baal Shem Tov taught that if a person is the 10th generation from him, they will not pass away until they've done complete teshuvah. Unfortunately, I think I missed it by one generation. But hey, really nice to know we're connected and related.
So we should compare family trees after this conversation, because my cousin actually traced it all the way.
Wow. We have more to discuss later.
Yes. And, I think this very much had an impact on me, because that meant, as a result of it, I read many of the stories and became intrigued, and it became a lot more personal, even though the stories are, again, personal for, I think, whomever reads them. So that was one thing. The other thing that really had an impact on me was the following: how we can derive an entire worldview and an entire life from a single book. And for me, growing up Jewish, growing up also in a religious family, that book was the Torah. At the same time, I'd like to generalize this understanding to the importance of deep learning. You see, the first course that I took when my freshman week of freshman year, in other words, the week before college started, the first course that I took that Harvard offered all its incoming undergraduates was a course in speed reading. And that course was useful because it helped me throughout my 4 years, and then as a graduate student, cover a great deal of material. Read hundreds of pages an hour and get through stuff. The problem with that, the upside of it, is that today I can also get through the sports pages very quickly, or go over some business literature that I need to very quickly. However, the downside of it is that the slow muscles in the brain are not exercised. And what I learned as a child growing up, again, in a Jewish religious family, is the importance of reading and rereading a text. So whether it's reading the Torah, every year, or the Talmud every 7 years, or whether it's engaging with your chavruta, with your friend, over one sentence and spending an entire hour or day or week just going back and forth and arguing and delving into the depth of a text. And there is a great deal of value to it. And I'd like to mention two areas where it is a great value. First of all, one of the things that I often wondered, and I would ask my parents about it, is how were my grandparents good businessmen?
Mm.
They didn't go to Harvard Business School. They didn't go to LBS. They were, they studied. They were rabbis. They were scholars. How is it they were also good in business? And the answer was that they delved deeply into a text. And by delving deeply into a text, you learn to understand. You learn to view. You learn to gain different perspectives, whether it's on a pasuk, a phrase from the Torah, or whether it's a business contract that you're reading. You also learn to more deeply read other people. Whereas if you only exercise your superficial muscles, then you're very often at a loss. You're incapable of truly understanding that business text or a person. So in business, something which is very very physical, very material, spiritual learning can contribute to it a great deal. The second area where deep learning contributes is relationships. The average amount of time that people spend on a web page today is 7 seconds. They spend 7 seconds and then click like, not like, get a quick impression. Now, again, there is some value to that. However, if these are the only muscles that we exercise, we aren't able to delve deeply into a text, which means we get bored quickly, which means we need constant new stimulation. And this also affects our ability to find interest in one person or in one family. We get bored and we need new stimulation. And we see the consequences of this throughout the world as relationships dissolve, as families dissolve, as deep, intimate relationships dissolve. Whereas if we read and reread the stories, whether it's the Torah, whether it's the Baal Shem Tov, whether it's another book that we really connect to, and we delve deeply into that as scholars, we can also delve deeply into another soul, into another person, and find find stimulus, find interest, find joy in that one person, just like we do in that one book, just like we do in that one family. So deep learning was the second and very important lesson that I learned.
That's actually really interesting, because you're right. I think our generation is very focused on knowledge, but less so on understanding. And very often understanding comes from delving deeper. There's a beautiful teaching in Pirkei Avot which says, hafach ba v'hafach ba dekuba, which means, and then dig it up again, because everything is in it. And I think really profound, if we approach every individual or every deep knowledge or deep piece of wisdom as if there were increasing layers, we would constantly revisit those rather than look for the novel and the fresh. That's very interesting. In terms of people and interpersonal, I think also it struck me that the Hebrew language is fascinating, especially in the context of the language we use when we talk about greeting another person. The word to greet someone in Hebrew, in biblical Hebrew as well, is Kabbalah, to receive them. The Mishnah says, mikabel et kol adam b'sever panim yafot. Receive every person with a happy countenance. And it's such a deep thing, because we don't typically think of meeting someone as receiving them. By the way, in English, there is the term to receive guests. But I think there's something deep there, because if you look at each person as if there's something here in this individual, even though I know them and I've met them many times, that I can receive, I think our approach to the interaction is different, and we actually do gain deeper levels of understanding from those individuals.
And Rabbi, if there is one more thing that I can say, the Baal Shem Tov was, I think the revolution that he introduced in Judaism was towards joy, happiness.
Yes.
And, is it a coincidence? I don't know that this is my field.
But that's a very important point that you said about Baal Shem Tov happiness, that they actually reported him to the local authorities and accused him of treason because he founded a charity that, by the way, still exists till today called Kol El Chabad, and supported in the 1800s Jews who chose to make the difficult, arduous journey to Israel and live under very poor conditions, which was then under Ottoman rule and which was at war with Russia. And so they claimed that he was a traitor sending funds to the enemy, among many other things. In the actual court case, one of the things that came up was the accusation that he was founding a new religion. Why? This is what they wrote, and we now have the documents because they were declassified. It said, why? Because he teaches his followers to practice joy under all circumstances.
Wow.
Blown away that fact, because clear and really visceral reactions that the wider mainstream Jewish community, which was steeped in the more old school guilt/shame model, reacted to was the joy that he embodied. And it's interesting, Tal, because the Jewish people there's a stereotype that we're people that are somewhat, let's just say, not always happy. The joke that they say about the waiter who's going around the restaurant asking people, excuse me, is everything all right? Is everything all right? And then the waiter sees two Jewish patrons and says, sorry, is anything all right? Is anything all right? And, I think it was Shimon Peres who said the Jewish people gave the world the gift of dissatisfaction, but we take it to a different level. We have mastered the art. But here's the point. Even though that's the stereotype, in reality, Judaism has many words that describe different shades of happiness and joy. And there's some fascinating research about this. I think it's Jacob de Bonad. There's Adam de Bonad. I think that's his name. He wrote multiple books on the topic. And his basic premise is you can learn more about a culture by their dictionary than by their guidebook, which I think is very profound. In other words, language doesn't just express, it informs the cultural norms. For example, in Israel, children are more attuned to gender difference from an early age because they have to distinguish between women and men when they speak and say the word you. So we have in Hebrew, sason, simcha, rina, ditza, chedva, each one conveying a different shade of joy. Rina comes from the joy that makes you sing, ditza that makes you dance, etc. And one of them is sason, which is so moving because it actually is a joy tinged with sadness, like the experience of a parent walking their child to the chuppah, right? By the way, today is the wedding of my sister-in-law. There's very few people are allowed to be in attendance, but my in-laws will be experiencing a lot of sason today. Obviously joy at seeing their daughter establish her own family, but a sadness in terms of flying the nest and so forth. So I wanted to ask you a very important question that I have thought about a lot, and that is, it seems like in the world of psychology, and especially the world of positive psychology, that particular field is, again, this is my intuition, but maybe it's not true, and you know it, so maybe you can weigh in on this. There's a disproportionate representation of Jewish people in the world of psychology, maybe in general, but specifically in the world of positive psychology. And I'm wondering if it's true, and if so, do you have any thoughts on why that is?
Yeah, first of all, yes, it is true. And, there is an important reason for it. And I think it's also connected. You were saying, Rabbi, again, half in jest, that, we as Jews, we know how to complain, we know how to kvetch. And yet, Israel, the Jewish state, is among the happiest countries in the world, consistently, despite all that it's going through, all the challenges that it has. So, I think there is something there that attracts attracts us. And I think what attracts us is our tradition, because our tradition presents a much more complex understanding of happiness. You know, many people say to me, you know, Tal, why are you using the word happiness? You know, it's a lightning rod. You know, when you use the word happiness, people immediately think, okay, so you're not serious, you're new age, you're, why as an academic do you use that word? And my answer to that is because I want to have a conversation around what is happiness. I want you to ask me this very question. And here is the thing. You see, in Hebrew, as you mentioned, there are many different words that are used to describe a positive state. What is that happiness? So first of all, happiness is not about experiencing a high all the time. Yes, there is sadness associated with a happy life. You know, you've heard me say this before, but you know, there are only two kinds of people who do not experience sadness or anger or frustration or anxiety. Two kinds of people who don't experience painful emotions. The first kind are the psychopaths. The second kind are dead people. So if you experience painful emotions, it's actually a good sign. It means you're not a psychopath and you're alive. So that's the first thing. You know, happiness is not just about pleasure. Second, happiness is also about a deep sense of meaning. You know, look at Viktor Frankl's work on man's search for meaning. And he and many others argue that that is perhaps the central element of a happy life. In his book, Frankl quotes Friedrich Nietzsche, who says, when you have a what for, every how becomes possible. When you have a what for, every how becomes possible. And you know, we can overcome difficulties. The Jews have overcome many difficulties because there was very often, usually, just about always, a sense of meaning and purpose in life. And again, whether it was a sense of meaning and purpose which is tied to, you know, the Kadosh Baruch Hu, to God, or whether it was tied to one's family or to one's community. But there was a deep sense of purpose. The reason why Israel is among the happiest countries in the world gets to another element, an important element of happiness, which is relationships. You know, one of the things that Baal Shem Tov talked about, and again, this is something that I've been, I grew up with. You know, he talks about how, you know, Judaism is about learning and it's about work. And he says our most important line of work is our relationship, cultivating our relationship, ben adam lechavro, between people, cultivating our relationships at home. This, Baal Shem Tov, and Judaism, I would argue, sees as a central element of the good life. The reason why Israel is among the happiest countries in the world is because relationships are important. Whether it's relationships with your extended family, where you go, you know, you have, you know, the Friday night meal on a regular basis, where you meet your friends on a regular, or it could be the relationships cultivated in school, military, or work. Strong relationships as a foundation of happiness. Now, when you see the openness to the whole spectrum of emotions as being important in Judaism, where you see relationships as central to Judaism, when you see scholarship, intellectual cultivation as a core element of Judaism, when you see the importance of complexity in general to studying a topic that is otherwise seen as flimsy and unsophisticated, well, then you see that almost there has to be a connection between Judaism and the study of happiness as it's studied today, which is more academic, deeper, and more comprehensive approach to happiness. There is almost, you know, I'm not an expert in in our tradition. Yes, I read it as, growing up. I read the Torah, of course. I read Pirkei Avot, the Talmud. I'm not an expert. However, everywhere I turn, when I look at the research in positive psychology, the science of happiness, everywhere I turn, I find a story that I heard as a child. I find a pasuk from the Torah or something from Pirkei Avot.
That's very interesting. It's for us, the greeting we wish each other has nothing to do with simcha. Instead, it refers to tova, shana tova. We wish each other a good year rather than a happy year. And there's a lot of depth to that, good well-being for the entire year. And we highlight not happiness as much as goodness. And I know there's a lot of social science about how helping and sharing and giving generates greater levels of happiness. I know I've heard you speak on this a number of times. You introduced me to a beautiful idea that the word Natan is a palindrome, could be read backwards and forwards, etc. And I think that that's a very meaningful idea. The idea that it's a life of goodness, not necessarily happiness. And it's interesting to note because you said that, I just want to touch for a moment on what you said earlier. There's a difference between self-help literature and the academics about this. The very term self-help or self-esteem and all of that emphasis on the self might in and of itself be a severe limitation towards achieving happiness. Because this is just intuitively, because I'm not an academic, I haven't studied this in depth. I would, in an alternate life, I would love to go on a sabbatical and study from you and with you, dear Tal. But in reality, intuitively, I feel that the more we think about ourselves and evaluate and reevaluate our state of happiness, actually the greater the formula for unhappiness. And maybe we're not built that way per se, to constantly reevaluate ourselves. In fact, there's a beautiful story about the Rebbe, where there was a fellow who was very miserable, who wrote a note to the Rebbe, and in the note he wrote 5 or 6 sentences saying, I live a terrible life. I feel terribly inadequate. I feel terribly lonely, and so on and so forth. The Rebbe sent back the note, and in his beautiful custom, he didn't write one word. All he did was circle one letter that repeated itself many times throughout the note, the first letter in every sentence, which was I. That was his response.
Wow.
And it's a beautiful idea. I heard from someone another question, which is in Hebrew. Theoretically, when we wake up in the morning, we should say, Ani modeh lefanecha melech chai v'kayam. Instead, we say, modeh ani. In other words, instead of saying, I am thankful, we say, thankful am I. And the reason for this, and this is very beautiful, is that this idea, they didn't want the I. Instead, it should be modeh, I am grateful. You can share maybe a few of your thoughts about some of the building blocks of happiness and PTG, for example, contentment, mindset, and so forth.
Sure. So Rabbi, maybe I can start with what you said last, which is about modeh ani. There's a lot of research in the science of happiness on the value of gratitude. So people who on a regular basis express gratitude, whether it's through the prayers, the mitzvot, whether it's by jotting down things for which you're grateful. Those people are happier, more generous, kinder toward other people. They are also more successful, matzliach. And finally, they're also physically healthier. So it actually strengthens our immune system. Now, expressing gratitude is always important. It is especially important during these times. This is one of the conditions that we can put in place for experiencing post-traumatic growth, for experiencing anti-fragility. Next, we talked about relationships, and I want to just say a little bit more about this, because this is especially important now. 3 months ago, when I talked about relationships, I would say relationships are important. They're especially important in terms of cultivating real rather than virtual relationships, because there is no substitute for coming together as a community, coming together as a family, celebrating. Again, one of the reasons why, Israelis or Jews enjoy higher levels of happiness. It's because of this togetherness. Now, over the past 2-3 months, this is not a possibility anymore. We celebrated Pesach on Zoom. with with my family. So it was it's obviously it's not the same. So the distinction between real and virtual relationships right now is mute. It's unhelpful. However, there is another distinction that we need to make. And that distinction goes back to what I talked about earlier when I talked about learning and intellectual cultivation. And the distinction we need to make when it comes to relationships today is between superficial and deep relationships. Because, I can have a relationship where I send, emojis, through WhatsApp and LOL and so on. Or I can get on Zoom or whatever it is with or the phone with my family and really talk and really share and really engage in a conversation. And it's this depth that leads to much higher levels of well-being, physical well-being, and as well as psychological well-being. In other words, even though right now we experience social isolation, distancing, that doesn't mean we have to forego deep relationships, which are the foundation of well-being, psychological and physical. I just want to say another thing. I really one of the texts that I assign in my course on happiness studies is by the Rambam, Hilchei Deot. And what the Rambam talks about there is the importance of the connection between mind and body. He talks about the importance of eating well, not eating too little nor too much. He talks about moderation. He also talks about the importance of exercise. And again, today we have research showing that exercise is as powerful as our most advanced psychiatric medication. In fact, exercising regularly, which means 3 times a week, releases the same norepinephrine, serotonin, dopamine, the feel-good chemicals in the brain that our psychiatric medications produce. Exercise does it without the side effects. Now, that doesn't mean that if you're on medication, you should get off and start exercising. Let your doctor, be part of that decision. Having said that, we need to start treating exercise. And I see, a couple of our listeners are now exercising as they listen. Hi, Helen. Good to see you doing it. That exercising is an important psychiatric intervention. So that's another thing that we can do. And finally, just one other thing. How is personal pursuit of happiness contributing to our happiness really? Is happiness important? If you look in the dictionary and you look at the word selfish, or you look at the thesaurus for synonyms for selfish, you know what you would find there? You would find evil, bad, immoral, and so on. So selfishness, terrible. On the other hand, if you look at selflessness, you find moral, generous, kind, and so on. In other words, you have a very clear distinction between these two. In the dictionary, in the thesaurus. In Judaism, you don't. In Judaism, there are 2 sides of the same coin. Self and other are interconnected. When you say ve'ahavta le'reacha kamocha, love your friend as you love yourself, it starts with the self. The self is the standard of evaluation. Or listen to Rabbi Hillel, or to Hillel, where he says, if I'm not for myself, who will be for me? If I'm only for myself, what am I? And if not now, then what? Then when? So the key is, yes, to be for yourself, to care about your own happiness. And at the same time, not just to care about your own happiness, to reach out and help others. There are 2 sides of one whole. And this is an essential truth in our tradition. And today, when we have the science, we also know that this is also an essential foundation, a pillar of a happy life. The ability to look within, to contribute, to give to the self, and to look out and to contribute and help others.
Very, very interesting. It's interesting because in the Jewish tradition, we don't find in the Torah, and we're coming up to Shavuot next week, that one of the 613 mitzvot or commandments talks directly to the theme of happiness. There's no mitzvah that says, thou shalt be happy. In fact, one of the references of happiness we have in the Torah, the word simcha, is when Moses is talking to the Jewish people during his last days. He says, Tachat asher lo avadet et Hashem Elokecha b'simcha u'v'tuv levav, because you didn't serve with happiness, therefore there was some type of a repercussion. In other words, the way I understand it, and the Alter Rebbe develops this in his Tanya, happiness is actually a means to an end and a byproduct of a meaningful life. So there's 2 points here. It's a means to an end, because we know so much about how happy people are more successful. Happy people are better human beings, better parents, better Jews. And so happiness is a tool in the arsenal and its emotional toolkit for well-being. And when we're at a higher state of well-being and in a good place, as we call it, we can be there for others as well. And then we have, of course, the notion of a byproduct, which brings me to a quick question. You mentioned, Victor. So, you know, of course, the American Constitution talks about the pursuit of happiness, okay? And I think that there are a few terms inadvertently created quite substantial damage. This is my personal intuition, and I welcome your disagreement or agreement. The notion that basically one wakes up in the morning and sees it as their inalienable right to pursue happiness as if happiness is something that can be pursued. Conversely, we have Viktor Frankl, who wrote beautifully, for success, like happiness, cannot be pursued. It must ensue. And it only does so as the unintended side effect of one's personal dedication to a cause greater than oneself, or as the byproduct of one's surrender to a person other than oneself. This ties in a lot of our themes together. Happiness must happen in the same success. You have to let it happen by not caring about it. And so my question to you is, have we hyped up happiness too much? Is it a good thing that we're always talking about it and asking ourselves every moment, am I happy? Am I not happy? In this relationship, am I happy all the time, or am I unhappy in my workplace, et cetera, et cetera? Have we set ourselves up for disastrous equation and evaluations? And ultimately, who is right? The American Constitution or Viktor Frankl?
No, it's a great question and a very important question. So there is actually research. This is by Iris Moss, M-A-U-S, that shows the following, and that is when people wake up in the morning, as you point out, and say, happiness is very important for me. I want to pursue happiness. I want to be happiness. Happiness is a high value for me. These people are actually less happy. Now, what do we do with this information? Because on the one hand, we know this, but on the other hand, as you point out, happiness is a good thing. Because if I become happier, I'll be more successful. If I become happier, my relationships will improve. If I become happier, I also become healthier. My immune system strengthens. Not to mention the fact that it feels good to feel good. So of course I want to be happy. So what do we do with, on the one hand, we're told, you know, you shouldn't wake up in the morning and say, I'm pursuing happiness, or happiness is important to me. But on the other hand, we're told that happiness really is a good thing. So we have a paradox, we have a contradiction in place. How do we resolve it? The way we resolve it is exactly as Viktor Frankl suggested, which is we pursue happiness indirectly. Let me give you an analogy. So we have the sun. If I look at the sun directly, then I'll be hurt. I'll start to tear up. Not healthy, not good for me. On the other hand, if I look at the sun broken down, say by a prism, then I can look at the colors of the rainbow, enjoy them, fathom them, savor them. In the same way with happiness, pursuing it directly, that's unhealthy. It will hurt me. However, if I break down happiness into its elements, just like breaking down the sunlight into its elements. If I break down happiness into its elements, then I can pursue each one of them separately and enjoy them. Now, what are the elements of happiness? So there are many models around this, but generally, looking at the models from around the world, I've summarized it as 5 elements. These are the equivalent to the 5 colors well, there are more, but 5 colors of the rainbow. The first element is spiritual well-being. Spiritual well-being is exactly what Frankl is talking about when he talks about finding a sense of meaning and purpose in life. It's about being present to the miracle of existence. You know, Albert Einstein, who's a world-class positive psychologist, once said, there are 2 ways to look at the world. One is as if nothing is a miracle. The other is as if everything is a miracle. So this is spiritual well-being, our ability to see the world as a miracle, our ability to connect to a sense of meaning and purpose. 2, by the way, related to our days today, we can find purpose in big things. We can also find purpose in small things. The distinction that Viktor Frankl made between the meaning of life and the meaning in life. You know, yesterday for me, the meaning was getting through the day, which is also important. So spiritual well-being, physical well-being is the second element. That's about physical exercise, it's about nutrition and so forth. The third element is intellectual well-being, deep learning that I mentioned earlier, or curiosity. You know, people who are curious, who are lifelong learners, actually live longer on average. So that's intellectual well-being. Then there is relational, interpersonal well-being, number 1 predictor of happiness, especially deep relationships. And finally, emotional well-being. How do we deal with painful emotions? Do we embrace them and let them in? Or do we reject them and then they intensify? Do we cultivate pleasurable emotions like gratitude and joy, simcha? So these 5 elements, spiritual, physical, intellectual, relational, and emotional well-being. The acronym is SPIRE, so it's easier to remember. And when we pursue these, spiritual well-being, when I pursue a sense of meaning and purpose, physical well-being, when I exercise on a regular basis, intellectual well-being, when I learn, constantly learn and grow, relational well-being, when I invest in my relationships, and finally, emotional well-being, when I cultivate gratitude and allow the free flow of painful emotions. When I pursue these 5 elements, what I'm doing is becoming happier. I'm indirectly pursuing happiness and then enjoying its numerous benefits, as well as not falling into the trap that comes when I look at the sunlight directly, when I pursue it directly.
Wow, that's actually really interesting. That's a beautiful summary, a summation of a lot of the various disparate world, you know, huge in and of themselves ideas that are written about at great length. And you're putting them together and saying there are 5 components. And then by pursuing the 5 components, the byproduct will be happiness rather than by pursuing the happiness, that's quite beautiful. You know, it struck me, Tal, and I look forward to discussing this further, that, and this is one of my personal dreams. Some decades ago, there was a revolution of consciousness. There was a shift of focus where society suddenly became more aware of the importance of physical fitness. And today, no self-respecting modern citizen of the Western world and culture is not a member of at least 1 to 3 or 4 gyms, some of which they do attend and some of which they will never step foot into, etc. And we're into diets and vegan and all forms of, you know, so physical fitness we are much more attuned to. With the advent of psychoanalysis and psychology, we become much more attuned to the importance of emotional and psychological hygiene and well-being. But I think there's one realm that we really do need to catch up on, and that would be the spiritual and the sense of purpose and the sense of meaning. And you know, again, I think there's an element here that's critical to bring out, which is living beyond or for something other than ourselves, the second part of Hillel. Because if the meaning is self-serving at all costs, it somehow defeats the purpose. And so this is more of a broad zooming out question for you. A few weeks ago, we had Professor Steven Pinker on for one of these beautiful sessions. Another wonderful thinker from Harvard, as I recall. And he talked about human and world progress. Of course, that's the subject of his recent book. And he demarcates 10 areas of tremendous, unprecedented, unparalleled, exponential progress. But in a subsequent email exchange with him, I asked him whether he felt that in the realm of mental well-being, mental health, emotional well-being, spiritual well-being, we're also seeing progress, or maybe perhaps, unfortunately, the very opposite. Maybe there's some degree of regression. And again, anecdotally, I can tell you, it seems to me that our society is struggling and suffering much more than ever before from mental health issues, from fragility, from that sense of inadequacy and judgment, and so forth. In fact, loneliness is now a national epidemic, and there's a minister of loneliness in this country. And of course, the Torah, the first time it introduces the term lo tov, it is in the context of being alone. So my question to you is, in your research, what is the data, what is the science saying? Is humanity progressing or regressing? And if we're regressing, what are some of the reasons, and how can we address that in our personal lives?
Good. You know, let me share a study, two studies that shed some light on this. The first one is one conducted by Jean Twenge, Twenge, Twenge. She's a professor in San Diego. And basically every 5 years, she and others before her measure the mental health of North American teenagers. And again, this applies in Europe. We see very similar trends in England. We see even more troubling trends in some of the Asian countries. But let me share this specific Twenge study. And every year, when we look at mental health, we see every 5 years, sorry, when they look at the teenagers, they see some change, you know, so in depression, anxiety, and so on, maybe 1% up, 1% down, but it's generally stable. Not so this time. This time, when they looked at the data, what they found was that levels of depression among teenagers went up by over 30%. Suicide rates went up by over 30%. Loneliness level associated with both went up by similar margin. And Jean Twenge, you know, looked through the data, and there was a lot of it, and she asked why. And her overarching conclusion was the following, and I quote, "It is as a result of the ascendance of the smartphone." The ascendance of the smartphone. Now, what happens with the ascendance of the smartphone? Yes, on the one hand, we are more connected. We can be reached anytime. On the other hand, it's the superficial that has taken over the deep when it comes to relationships. It is the virtual that has taken over the real. That's one thing. The second thing, we constantly are exposed to stimulation on that, you know, little box. And as a result of it, we, and mostly the younger generation, don't have the bandwidth, the patience to sit down and read and reread. You know, Voltaire said it, you know, hundreds of years ago. The French philosopher said it, the multitude of books is making us more ignorant. The multitude of books is making us more ignorant. Well, on this cell phone here,
right,
do I have a multitude of books and magazines and information that's coming in constantly? So it's the two things. First of all, it's the shallowing of relationships as opposed to the deepening of relationships. And second, it's the shallowing of learning as opposed to the deepening of learning. And by the way, the two deepenings, as I mentioned earlier, are connected. Because when we can delve deeply into a book, we're more likely to delve deeply into another person, to know another person better. So, these are the reasons why we're not doing very well in this realm. This is, of course, connected to a sense of meaning and purpose and spirituality. It's very difficult to cultivate a meaningful, deep, spiritual relationships just sending emojis and LOLs to one another.
You know, it's very interesting you keep coming back to this theme, and it's so resonant, and it's also deeply Jewish. The Hebrew word for panim, for face, is quite interesting because the English word for face actually means exterior, like from the word facade, which implies independent from any depth, as it were. But the Hebrew word for panim is panim, which means the inwardness. And this idea of inwardness, or panimiyut, is a very fundamental value in Chassidut, actually. It's the opposite of chitzoniyut, which means the externalization. And I think we live in a modern society of externalization. Whenever I feel something, I don't actually allow it to sit and to savor, but I externalize. That's what social media is doing. So there's inwardness and bidud, or silence, or introspection, or aloneness. Not loneliness. Aloneness is not loneliness, according to the Hasidic masters, especially in Breslov. And I think that's what's one of the major hits of modern times, and COVID-19 has been that sense, that sense of discomfort that we have, unfortunately, with our own selves and the people closest to us, which actually, as you put beautifully earlier, almost forces us to encounter deeper levels and layers of interactivity and meaning, both inside ourselves and others. And so there's no more escapism in some way in these times. And it's a fascinating thing. And I wonder whether society will learn from this or will not. And I know we're over time, and I can't thank you enough for your time. Do we have 5 more minutes? I know we've gone way over time. Okay. What is, one more question, and then a series of rapid fire questions just for some fun. What is your view of how society will be impacted on the other side of this? Do you think we're actually going to learn from this in a real way, or are we simply going to go right back to doing things at a busier and faster pace than before because we feel the rubber band effect where we go in the opposite direction?
No, it's a good question. On the one hand, I'm hopeful. On the other hand, I'm a little bit pessimistic. So we are learning many important lessons, specifically about the importance of intimate relationships, specifically about the value of slowing down, about the importance of respecting Earth more than we have been. There are many inherent lessons in what we are going through as a society. Will these lessons last, or will our heart harden again once we are out of this plague? And this is a real question. You know, you look at New York, for instance, post 9/11. Some of my colleagues did research in New York just after 9/11, and what they found was that kindness increased significantly, generosity increased significantly. People were smiling more. They had more time for one another post 9/11. That new state of affairs, this new normal, lasted for at most 6 months. And then it was back to business as usual. Those who were kind before remained kind. Those who were, hard and inconsiderate went back to being hard and inconsiderate. And the question is, how do we make change last? And the answer, again, lies in our tradition, in our religion. I talk a lot about the 3 R's of change. The 3 R's of change are reminders, repetition, and rituals. Reminders, repetitions, and rituals. If you look at any successful change process, whether it's individual, whether it's organizational, whether it's national, you need these 3 elements. And again, these 3 elements, we talk about them today in science, they're inherent in religion. You have reminders every day through the mitzvot. Every day you're reminded to express gratitude. Even though you know it, you know the prayer of my heart, and yet you are commanded to say it, and to say it with kavanah, with intention, so that it reminds you to do it over and over again. As a result of the reminder, there is obviously the repetition. As a result of the repetition, rituals are formed. What are rituals? Quite literally, new neural pathways that exist in our brain that get us to do something over and over again. For example, brushing your teeth is a ritual. You don't need to be reminded now. You had to be reminded by your mom when you were a kid. And then it becomes a ritual, automatic neural pathways. Take it to sports. You hit a tennis ball 1,000, 20,000 times, it becomes a ritual. You wake up in the middle of the night and you're hitting the same stroke over and over again. The same for expressing gratitude on a regular basis. The same for being kind to other people. Generosity, giving, that is also a habit that we can cultivate. How do we cultivate it? By setting ourselves reminders, by repeating that particular action, this way of being or this way of thinking, until it becomes second nature and an embedded neural pathway that we commit to automatically as a matter of habits. John Dryden, a British poet, wrote hundreds of years ago, we first make our habits and then our habits make us. And of course, there is, as I mentioned, this comes straight from religion, the ongoing reminders, the doing, which is more important than the thinking, because if you do it over and over again, shelo lishma ba lishma, if you do it over and over again, if you make it if your deeds exceed your wisdom, as it says in Pirkei Avot, then it will become second nature to you, a habit. And that's the only way we can attain lasting change. Reminders, repetition, rituals.
Tal, I have to say, if you ever want to take a sabbatical and join the rabbinate, I'd be really happy to work alongside you. I think so much of what we're talking about is so interconnected. There's such a strong overlap. And to me, it's mind-blowing, really, how so many of these truths that we now know scientifically and neurologically, because we have the tools to measure, were taught to us for thousands of years, and we take them for granted. And that, to me, is a really powerful idea. One of my favorite jokes, and I'm actually working on something on humor as well, which I'd love to share and get your thoughts about, because humor is a very integral part of well-being as well, and the Jewish people happen to excel at it. In 1980, I believe it was, or 70, sometime around then, the Time magazine estimated that 80% of comedians in America were Jewish, which is a staggering statistic. But in any event, there's one of my favorite jokes is of a modern Indian chief. And he was asked by his people whether it was going to be a cold winter and they should gather firewood. And so he says, yes, we should, because he just thought better be safe than sorry. But that evening, he just wanted to check, so he called up the weatherman, the local weather station, to see if it was going to be a cold winter. And the guy said, it's going to be quite cold. And a week later, they come back to him and they say, Chief, is it going to be cold? And he says, yes, it's going to be quite cold. He calls up the weatherman. He says, it's going to be really cold. And this goes on back and forth until at one point, the Indian chief turns on the phone to the weatherman and says, how do you know it's going to be so cold this winter? He says, because the Indians are gathering wood like crazy. Deep there, because if you modern Jew, a young person, and you ask them, well, what are your values? And they'll tell you, my values are, heal the world, are save the environment, are be kind, are peace, are philanthropy, gratitude. They would never know that those very values derive literally, explicitly from our tradition. And it's ironic that, we, the Indians in the joke, are looking to the weatherman as if the source of this wisdom comes from modern technology, when in fact it comes from our ancient wisdom and tradition, which we celebrate this coming week. A few quick notes on what you said before, fascinating. Firstly, you talked about connection. Just interesting, the Hebrew word for marital relations in the Bible is da'at. Ha'adam yada et chava. And this is very profound because, especially in the context of intimacy and relationships, today we find a widespread recreationalization, if you will, of intimacy. We have the biblical root that teaches the importance of inner knowledge and deeper yet continuing levels of intimate awareness. When you talked about deed and repetition, the word ma'aseh, ma'asin in the Mishnah actually means to force one to do, rather than to do out of desire and volition. The very word for action implies a certain built-in tension between desire and deed, which is very integral to Jewish thinking. Now, a rapid fire session, because we've kept you so long. Here we go. If you could have dinner with anyone alive today, who would it be and why?
Alain de Botton,
Really? Okay.
the
Another one of our boys.
British Swiss philosopher. I have many questions for him, and I think he's the most brilliant philosopher alive.
Fascinating. By the way, he talks in great detail about repetition, and in his book Atheist 2.0, which understandably you might be surprised for me, a rabbi, to be quoting, he actually talks in great detail about the Jewish wisdom that the secular world needs to know. Fantastic. If you could play squash with anyone from the Bible, who would it be and why? By the way, Tal is a world-class squash player. And by the way, you've given the Jewish people a good reputation with that. You've raised the level of sports productivity to a different level.
Yeah, I think it would be with King David. He has a very accurate shot.
Very interesting. By the way, the Hebrew word for sin, chet, actually means missing the mark, which in itself is quite deep, but you're very right about that. And David was an amazing character, which, by the way, to my mind, is why his words are quoted more than any other sage or individual in Jewish history in the prayer liturgy. They're the template, and precisely because they're so real and vulnerable and raw, and because faith to him wasn't some abstraction, it was something he lived with day in, day out. It's his autobiography, the book of Psalms, which we read, of course, again on Shavuot because of the connection to King David. Next question. Who is your greatest inspiration in life?
Mom and dad, Ima ve'Abba.
In one word, what did each of them teach you?
They taught me the value of kindness, generosity, and learning.
Wow. Now, they sound Jewish. Is that the case? Jeff Bezos actually says something very beautiful. He said when he was a 10-year-old, he was really smart and clever and very into math. And he was once taking a cross-country journey with his grandparents. And his grandmother you familiar with the story?
Please, go ahead.
Okay, it's a classic, I guess. And anyway, his grandmother was a chain smoker, and he had come across an ad that calculated how each cigarette takes off a certain amount of time from your life. And after an hour or so, he told his grandmother, by my calculation, you have diminished your life by X amount of time based on the amount of cigarettes you smoked. And she burst into tears. He thought, of course, she would be proud of his genius, but in fact, he had hurt her feelings deeply. And they pulled over to the side, and his grandfather took him out of the car and told him something I found really powerful. He said, in life, you will learn that it's far easier to be clever than it is to be kind. And here too, some of our greatest heroes, of course, are the ones that were kind over clever. If you had a conversation with your 15-year-old self, what would you say?
That too shall pass. I would teach myself that lesson about embracing painful and difficult emotions, about embracing hardship and challenges. That the story of that too shall pass.
Wow. Another question. This is a very big question. I'm sorry if I'm getting heavy, but how would you like to be remembered? How would you like to be remembered in very simple terms? I think it's a question that really helps us crystallize the type of people we are and want to become. And Judaism, of course, is a religion of life. In fact, throughout the entire 5 books of Moses, we don't have any reference to the next world because it's a this world religion. And yet many of our rituals do sharpen the sense of mortality, which I believe our society has felt very viscerally over the past months. And so my question to you is, how would you like to be remembered?
As a bridge, a bridge between or among people, a bridge between academia and Main Street, a bridge between ancient and modern, knowledge and wisdom.
Beautiful. What would you tell a young person who's struggling with relationships, a young person who's struggling with their own sense of self-worth?
That too shall pass.
Wow. And in your personal life, what are some of the rituals, and with this we'll conclude, what are some of the rituals that you have found to be personally meaningful and that have helped you overcome adversity and challenge?
Yes, so it's starting the day with with meditation. It's exercising regularly. It's putting time aside to be with people I love without distractions. So switch everything off and just be with the people I love. This is the most energizing and fueling experience. And if it's not possible face to face, then online will have to do.
Right. Well, you sound like you're describing Shabbat to some extent. And in reality, someone once put it, he said, for a Shabbat observer, when they reach the year 70 years old, they will have spent 10 years of their life on this island or oasis of spirit, if you will, which I think is quite beautiful. Again, the letters of Shabbat, when we arranged, spelled Tashev, which means to return, to come back to that inner sanctuary. And in fact, as Heschel and others have beautifully articulated, if the 6 days of the week are about becoming, Shabbat is about being. And this too, I think, touches on mental health immensely. And I know it's one of the titles of your books, which was fantastic. The idea of self-esteem and how to evaluate our worth. And I think that's another subject for another time. My dear friend Tal, what can I say other than thank you, thank you, thank you. I have to give you I want to give you a title. I want to call you Talmid Chacham for a moment. And it's a very important title because it's a title we give to a sage and a scholar in Judaism. And the word itself is quite profound because the meaning is Talmid, which means student, hyphenated sage, which is quite telling about how Judaism views knowledge and its pursuit. That is to say, are you a sage or a student? They seem to be mutually exclusive and the term oxymoronic, but in fact, in Judaism, Ezehu Chacham Halomed Mikol Adam, someone who maintains that marvel, that adventure, that sense of receptivity, that curiosity. And so our blessing to you, Tal, is first and foremost that you and your wife and your beautiful children and your extended family and your parents should benefit from only extremely good health, from sense of prosperity and serenity. And going back to the biblical verse from Moshe, the tuv levav, such a powerful term, which means an inner state of satisfaction and fulfillment. And may you be blessed with the energy and the intellectual creativity to continue to illuminate and to uplift and to elevate and to create bridges between people, ideas, cultures, the abstract and the practical for many, many, many decades to come. And we cannot wait to have the ability and the privilege of seeing you in person, please God, very soon.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Rabbi. And thank you all. And take good care of yourself and of others.